Hello, I'm Chaplain Eric Doolittle. Welcome to Faith and Conversations about Life, Belief, and Everything. Today, we're talking about faith and North Central College with Lynn Pries and Tom Babler'. The Reverend Dr. Lynn Pries is a 1967 graduate of North Central College in Math, Education, and Religious Studies. He earned his Master's of Divinity from Evangelical Theological Seminary while it was still located here in Lawrence Academic Center and in Kekaufer Hall.
Right.
And then he went on to get his Doctorate of Ministry from Garrett Evangelical Seminary after the merger of Evangelical and Garrett. Lynn's wife, Donna, is also a North Central College graduate. And in 1994, Lynn returned to North Central as the chaplain and served for 20 years until his retirement in 2014. The Reverend Tom Babler' graduated from North Central in 1969 as a religion major. He was also a member of the Cardinal basketball team from 1967 to 69. He went on to graduate from Evangelical Theological in 1973. Tom served as a United Methodist elder, including 14 years at Community United Methodist Church here in Naperville. His wife, Mary, is also an alum, and as are several of their children. Tom is a life trustee of Garrett Evangelical Theological and is wrapping up his work on the Presidential Inauguration Committee for Dr. Thomas. Let's welcome both of them back to North Central College. Let me start by saying this topic, the idea of faith and North Central College, is a conversation we have had literally for a decade now. And both of you have been so influential in helping me understand the intersection of those two things, what it means to be part of North Central and how the affiliation with the EUB Church and the United Methodist Church have been so important to us. So I wanted to kind of start with your personal stories a little bit, and then we'll dig in a little bit. So Lynn, you came to North Central in the 1960s when George St. Angelo was the chaplain and was leaning into the intersection of faith and academics and social justice and formation for young people. What was that like for you? How did you get involved into that area as you were on campus?
Well, it was a mandatory chapel twice a week, Tuesday and Thursday. The North Central schedule has community time on Tuesday and Thursday, and that's because that was the chapel time. So it remains as a part of North Central history that this Tuesday and Thursday time before lunchtime does not have classes. Interesting that it continues after 50 some years. And so everyone at that time, and this was mid-60s, I came in 1963, so everyone fit in Pfeiffer Hall. So twice a week, there was a chapel speaker. There were 3 times a year where it was a worship service. But the other times, it was a convocation speaker. And the speakers were some national figures, a national newscaster, Sander Van Oker was one of them. One of the African American speakers, and there were several of those during that time, was the author of Black Like Me, where this reporter had taken some medication that darkened his skin, and he had lived for several months among African American communities and saw a very different experience, had a very different experience. And then he, as a black person, in places where he knew he would have, or he had already experienced life as a white person. So he talked about how those differences were so stark and dramatic, and this was, over 50 years ago, and I remember the impact that had.
What was that like for you, coming from a place, I know Lynn's story pretty well, coming from, farm towns in Minnesota, here you are in a space that, even though North Central was not heavily diverse, right? You started to see more diversity, and you were hearing the stories of Black folks and Black students, and you had that chance. What was that like to be challenged by that, to be invited into that understanding?
Well, I think it was the chapel speakers that really moved me. A lot of North Central students over the first century or more of North Central came from Evangelical or Evangelical United Brethern Churches after 1946, which was a German-speaking denomination that converted to English probably World War II or maybe a little bit earlier. But wherever there were German immigrants, there were AUB or Evangelical United Brethern Churches. So North Central, with that heritage, recruited people from these German communities, which were frequently farmers. So I came from a small town in Minnesota near Rochester, where the Mayo Clinic is located. I grew up in a town of about 500. My dad bought a farm, and then we began farming. So I spent all of my weekends and a lot of evenings milking cows, and I rarely saw anybody who was not German, Swedish, or Norwegian. And in Rochester, the Mayo Clinic brought people from all over the world. So there were some African American people that came to be patients, and once in a while you'd see an African American walking on the street or in a store, but it was a very rare occasion. And at church camp, there was a young man from Sierra Leone who had who'd grown up in a mission program that the Evangelical United Brethern Church had sponsored. They had schools and hospital and a number of churches in Sierra Leone. And this young man was brought to the United States, I don't know, for training but during the good part of the summer, he went through church camp with us. And so really my first contact with a Black person was from Sierra Leone.
No.
And I remember him being very good at soccer, which was
unknown at the time.
Unknown at that time, yeah, right. So he was teaching us some soccer moves, and we were very interested, and we were amazed at how good he was at that. And then when it came to North Central, there were African American students, but in fairly small numbers.
Right.
Some of the issues were when a white woman student would date an African American student. This was really a big deal, So I remember maybe toward my senior year, there were African American students who complained to Walgreens or grocery store, drugstores, that there were not the shampoos and hair conditioners for African Americans. So, and despite the fact that they had talked to managers, nothing seemed to happen. So, so I was a group of white students and a few African American students that were here, and so we had a protest with signs, and we stood in front of Oswald's drugstore, and I think it was Walgreens at that time too. And lo and behold, those products did appear on the shelves.
Wow.
So we declared, victory. We made a difference.
Yeah.
And for African American students, it's a big deal.
Right.
Not only that you had to go home to buy the stuff, but it was a recognition that Naperville was recognizing that they were African Americans on campus.
Wow. I want to pull Tom into this too, because I know you had a similar experience. And so, what was it about the college at that time, being EUB, that brought you here, and what was important about that relationship between who the EUB was and what you were looking for as you came into the college? Because this was just a couple of years later.
Right. I came in the fall of '65. Lynn is my elder and model. I grew up in the same kind of farming community. I came from a dairy farm in Northwest Illinois, and I came to North Central because I was a member of the Evangelical United Brethern Church, and our pastor. It was like there was just one school, and it was North Central College. Someone in my dad's generation had come here. I was the first one in our family to go to college. But we just knew because of the church connection, this was our school. It was the church school. And I had, from my very young years, had known my call to ordained ministry. And so to go to college and seminary in Naperville was the plan. And so I followed the church. And kind of my, my vision now and my passion is to say, what does that story have to do with someone who's come to North Central today? They said, I have no idea what an Evangelical United Brethern is. I'm not United Methodist. I'm not called to ordained ministry, but I do, and I've done a lot of thinking and studying on this. I do think there is I'm saying spiritual DNA that relates not just to Lynn and myself. We're here but I think it's a DNA that is deeper and broader, and also the story, our parochial story, I do believe connects with students who are here today. And so I'm passionate about learning that story and telling that story about a spiritual DNA that would bring someone to North Central College in 2023 on a whole different track. And yet, I do believe bearing some of the same spiritual and social and racial and political consequences and outcomes. So I'm working on that idea.
And I want to dip into that a little bit. I mentioned that one of the things that I love is we have so many students who are athletes now. And you were an athlete. And what it was like to try and, you came in, you had a track that you were going to follow, you already had your identity, and you had all these experiences that kind of transformed an understanding of what that might be. What was it like having the time to balance academics, your personal growth and reflection, your spiritual life, your athletics? Like, what was that like for you? What was good? What was challenging? What was that like to live in that space for you?
When you state it that way, I realize how much I didn't know. I mean, I didn't know about balance. I mean, that wasn't a term. It was like, be a good student, play basketball. Self-care had not been invented in those days. That wasn't vocabulary.
It didn't fit in dairy farms.
It didn't fit on the dairy farm. We milked the cows every morning and every night, no matter what. And that's how the kind of student I was. And so I guess what I see now is what I didn't have that I see here now. I have connections with Brad Spencer and the football program. I played basketball, so I go to almost every basketball game now, and I'm excited about Vince, our new coach. I see how compartmentalized my life was. I put a lot into studying. I was a student, first of all. I knew what it cost my folks for me to be here. I just was invested in that. I wanted to play basketball, and so I went, but that's another life. And then self-care, I don't think I took good care of myself. I mean, I was always in chapel Tuesday and Thursday. I always went to worship at First EUB Church on Sunday. I just thought our life was school and church. And so I was in worship always. And the people at Community Church, then First EUB, had great influence. Bob Harmon and Warren Ebinger and Paul Washburn, who had left just, in your time, were the giants that I thought these, and then to preach in that pulpit was just amazing. So I'm saying what I didn't do, and what I see now, starting with Al Carius and carried with Brad Spencer, and what I hear about the baseball team, is the integration, which we didn't think about. We just said, I go to school, I go to play basketball. But now I'm very inspired. I'm very inspired what I see in the athletic program, dealing with academics, the high academic achievement of our athletes, and the high grade point average on that large football team, and on other teams. And so I see an integration now that I applaud. It's something that I'm excited about. It's something that I didn't know, but I'm wondering if I was practicing some of it without knowing it.
Yep. One of the pieces that I've just have started in conversation with is our new medical sciences area. And as they were talking about kind of holistic healing and wellness, and I know that's a conversation we're having in student affairs and we're having in academic affairs. Like there's this understanding of like, how do we bring these things together and encourage our students to have that conversation for themselves? And I found the old John Wesley primitive physics books, which was like his home remedies that he published, 23 editions in his lifetime.
Influenced by his mother.
Yes.
His mother was the family doctor.
Exactly. And so many people, it was a justice issue because people didn't have access to medical care, but they could have these home remedies.
That's right.
And in that book, he even talks about you should drink enough water, you should get enough sleep, you should go on exercise. And so that idea of care across the board was really something that's built into our Wesleyan DNA that sometimes we forget because culture likes to put us in these different boxes and different things. And so I'm gonna go back to you, Lynn, to think about that, because you are a merger of two different areas when you were a student here, because you were mathematics and education and religious studies. Those are two things most people don't necessarily see going together. And you did that, and then I know that you've had those conversations as you were a chaplain and helping people navigate the analytical and the spiritual and how those things come together. How were you formed in that when you were here? How was it influential in your work as the chaplain?
Well, I became math major because I could get good grades in math. And when some of the folks were having difficulty with second year calculus, and I had become proficient sufficiently to get A's. It seemed like that was a good major and would keep my scholarship, and I really enjoyed mathematics. But I think it was my farm experience where you didn't spend a lot of time in recreation things. You did your homework. So there were times when I spent 2 to 3. I think one time I spent 5 hours on a daily assignment. We had calculus for a year and a half at 7:30. But by the time I was halfway through my sophomore year, I had a math major almost all wrapped up. And that gave me some freedom to study the courses that I really enjoyed, which were among religion courses. So, and I came with a concern for ministry, but I really wanted to not have that as the only option. I wanted to explore other things and always have a backup. I guess that was my concern. So So I graduated with an education in math, and I had the courses for certification to teach math at a middle school or high school level. And then I had enough religion courses to be able to function in seminary. So as I progressed through North Central, I became more and more involved in campus ministry events and campus ministry organizations. And there was a organization at that time called the Seeger Association. It was for people preparing for ordained ministry or considering ordained ministry. Or in some ways, it might have been somebody in giving their life in service in social work or some other way. So I was elected president my junior year. So I focused on that organization a great deal. We had weekly meetings and speakers, and a lot of the speakers were from the seminary, and so I got to know students and faculty members. And then, quite interestingly, my vice president was the woman who became my wife. So this Seeger Association turned out to be a really good thing for me.
Yeah, good investment, yeah.
In several ways.
So for both of you, you spent lifetimes being in ministry, in multiple levels, because I know both of you did work at the local level, you did stuff in leadership, you did stuff in social justice. As students are trying to figure out how to integrate their beliefs, their faith, and then vocation and calling and work. You have worked with students, you have worked with people in the local church. How do you lead them into that conversation to see how this comes together, right? Somewhere along the line, you went from, I was a student, I was an athlete, I did this and this, and you figured out how to make it all come together to be who you are and to be who God made you. How do you encourage others towards that kind of wholeness of being?
I'm interested.
Go ahead.
In the wholeness. I was on a straight and narrow track that led me from childhood to high school to North Central College. But what happened is when I got to North Central College, it opened my world. My world was as small as the track I was on. But it was at North Central College, and that's where I'd like to talk about the DNA, where this place opens the world. And so now I'm with folks not like myself, and I'm with ideas far beyond what I had considered. And so it was in this community that my ministry was shaped. I had a goal, I had an idea. I'd like to be an ordained pastor of a local church. But what that is, so I mean, person saying I'm looking for my vocational goal, I think we find that, it finds us. And then I think being at North Central College is where that world opens up. And the experience I had, Lynn, with Martin Luther King, I was a freshman. I had only been here a few months, August of 65. In spring of 66, Martin Luther King came to the amphitheater. He was in Chicago. He said one of the most difficult visits he had in Cicero in Chicago. But Dr. King preached at the amphitheater. And at the Union, there was a sign up that said, do you want to take a bus trip to the... I don't know, I don't think I knew who Martin Luther King was. I said, here was this farm boy on the bus. And so I went. Mahalia Jackson sang. Dick Gregory was on the stage, Harry Belafonte. And I was sitting with this white delegation up in the upper deck, far in the upper deck. But I was there and I thought, you know what? This world is something else. I mean, that was one piece of my world changing through Seeger Association, through Dr. Sockman and Dr. Nauman, through Dr. Eastman and novel and reading literature. And so I think this is the place to pursue vocation, say, well, I've changed my mind. That's all right, because while you're pursuing this calling, you're finding a world that you didn't know was there.
Yeah, the options that you came in kind of thinking this,
I
and
did.
all of a sudden you recognize that even within what you thought was a
Yeah.
very narrow focus, there was all these opportunities
That's right.
that just opened up. Those doors just opened right before you.
And then in my second year of seminary, Wilbur Hart came to me one night in World Christianity. He said, "Would you like to go to Singapore?" I didn't know, and I said yes. And it was an internship through the Board of Gold Ministry. Mary and I went around the world. We'd only been married 2.5 years. I was a student pastor at Wesley Methodist in Singapore, fulfilling a requirement at ETS. But talking about your world changing, we lived in the Republic of Singapore. Hindu, Muslim, Chinese, European, and all of a sudden, that was where I was a pastor. I think how God set me on this track that started with only one choice. I only have one school on my list I'm going, and what that one choice turned out to be. And that's what I'd like to talk to students about, because I think what's happening here is a retelling of that story. It's happening now, it's happening again, it's happening ways beyond my imagination. Health sciences, I mean, what is this? And so it's happening, and it's a part of a DNA, I believe, and I'd like to draw the connection between now and then.
No, and I think that that's great because it's still that conversation.
Yes.
That, you know, students come in and they have this one idea of what they're going to do,
Yeah.
the expectations of their family, the realizations of the financial burden that you
Yes.
mentioned about.
Yes.
Like that story doesn't change.
Right.
It's how do we get them to see those opportunities
Yes.
and tap into who they are,
Yeah.
who they want to be, and see how that engages the world. Like that continues to be the work. And that's why I'm going to throw it back to you, Lynn, is think about, like that continues to be the work of the chaplain, right?
Yes. I think college is the place where you leave your home family. There are commuters who still are living at home, but you're in an environment that exposes you to the world academically, and there's so many ways that people can travel, and many people have experienced many cultures by the time they graduate. Just incredible experiences. So that, and your ideas from age 18 to 22 frequently change a great deal. And that opens you up to a lot of questions about what's most important. When I was here, I remember George St. Angelo having worship services that several times had the book of Joshua, chapter 24, choose this day whom you will serve. And that, there's so many places you could go and be, but what's really significant? And I think those questions begin to come in that 18 to 22 year period. As a college chaplain, I had many conversations with people who were changing their major, or they were doing something like my major is math, and I want to do something completely different. I can understand that. And sometimes I prepared to do this, and I don't want to do that anymore, because I've had the experience here that helped me understand this is not what I want to do. But be able to understand that at age 22, even though commencement is only months away, still, what a gift! You're beginning to know what you want to do, and for some, it's a whole life experiences of trying some things and finding. But if you can find out some basic direction for life in the time you're here, from a first-year student to a senior, what a gift that is. And what a joy it was to be a part of the staff and to hear students talk about those significant issues. I remember one student who said, my parents never took me to church, and they were abusive to each other. They were unfaithful to each other, And she said, I want to have a good family, and I want to do good things. Tell me about Jesus.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
You know, so to have those life-changing experiences, that happens all the time. You know, so many students are going through that. This is an incredible place to be. To have some resources to help to guide you in that growth and discernment of what you want to do in life,
Right.
and what's important in life.
And across life, it's not just what do you want to do, right? It's who do you want to be?
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
Right? A fundamentally different
Who am I?
question.
Yeah. Yeah. That's right.
And it's not that we want people to not be good at their career, but there's something more that we can do to get them to ask the right questions and the tools to explore what life can be and what do they want out of it.
Yeah.
You wanted to jump in, I could tell.
Yeah, a parallel or a parable maybe. I've seen a couple episodes of Finding Your Roots, which is Henry Louis Gates. It's on PBS. I'm not a regular, but I've seen places where Henry Gates helps someone learn the story, tell stories, learn stories, hear stories about who they are. And I've seen episodes when persons are just brought to tears. Say, I didn't know that's who I was. I didn't know that's where I came from. I didn't know those are my roots. Finding your roots. My hope for North Central and this new generation and this new presidency is I think we can do a Henry Louis Gates venture here and say, why is this happening? See, I think there's a reason. I call it spiritual DNA. One example, Evangelical United Brethern. The church was born in November of 1946, just a few months before I was born. It was Evangelical, it was United Brethern. In November 46, it was Evangelical United Brethern. Now here's this predominantly white, rural denomination from Pennsylvania to Eota, Minnesota, that
That's my hometown.
that was born. 2 years later, after World War II, 1948, was the first assembly of the World Council of Churches. First time the World Council met. After the war, the world was torn by war. The churches of the world said, we must come. You know who was in the front row? This is amazing. The Evangelical United Brethern Church. These white guys, old. You know, why? Because this is who we are. This German pietism, this Lutheran piety says something about, I'm a part of a larger world. And in the Evangelical United Brethern Church, fellowship was always placed over doctrinal purity. Some churches said, you can't belong here unless you believe the right thing. And here's the right thing. In our denomination, it was called Gemeinschaft, the German word, and which I like it because you can't translate it. You can only live it.
Yes.
Don't try to translate
Sure.
Gemeinschaft. Sometimes they say association, sometimes they say fellowship, sometimes don't translate it.
Brethren.
Brethren.
Right?
Yeah, brethren. And see, it was lived out. So here's this new denomination, 1948, in a broken world, coming to sit at one table. They said, we need to sit with people not like us. We're going to be members of a fellowship of people who are different than we are. That's our ancestors. And I'd like to translate that and keep translating. How is that our identity here of who we are?
The logo of the EUB church is a handshake.
Yep.
And it goes back to a handshake in 1760.
In a barn.
In a barn, where a Mennonite, poorly educated or barely educated, but a fantastic speaker, was addressing very effectively a group of German immigrants in a barn.
In deep spiritual roots.
Yeah. And a pastor who was among the best educated people from Germany And Germany had among the best theological education at that time.
Let me put a name on that. So the speaker at the barn was Otterbein, correct?
Right.
Okay.
So, yes, that's right.
The Mennonite was Bame.
Oh, okay, Bame. Thank you. Thank you.
Martin
Okay.
Bame was the
Oh, okay.
poorly educated farmer.
Okay.
Right.
And Otterbein was the elite
Otterbein was-
German.
Philip
Right.
Otterbein, right.
Yeah, the elite German educated.
Yes.
Right.
And so,
And they came together and they shook hands and said, "You're my brother.
Yeah, yeah.
We are brothers."
They didn't know each other, but they knew their fellowship.
Right.
and one of the things that just fascinates me, and I can't believe we're already running out of time, but I just wanted to, coming out of that World Council experience, the World Church
Yeah.
Council, right? You see right after that, there's some really intentional, incredible movements back at the college where there was so much influence, because immediately
right.
you see Dr. Hood, the first black graduate from North Central,
Yeah.
is in 1950.
After that time.
And you've got Toshio Ota, who comes from Japan, and I know he graduates soon thereafter.
Yeah.
And so there had already been those ties to the world that
Yeah.
I think would surprise people, thinking of, like you said, kind of a small,
Yeah.
not diverse group.
Not
But very
diverse.
quickly you see them reinvest into that space, and that it plays out.
This not diverse group felt deep ties with a world that wasn't like this group.
Right.
That's the DNA that I think we are living out of.
Wow. And you think about what that means for where we are now, right?
Yes.
Where we are in a society that silos people, that
Yeah.
we are in a media culture that you only hear your echo chamber, that specifically to say that it's part of our DNA to break through that and to try to create a space where people have intentional discussion,
Yeah.
where we have a dialogue of different ideas, where we're encouraging people to explore beyond that, and to hopefully engage that in thoughtful ways, even when we may not agree on everything.
see, that's
but
what-
at least we're recognizing what that diversity can look like.
And see, the heart of it, it's so hard to be in a diverse setting and be genuine there, but the heart of it is Otterbein and Bame. We are brothers and sisters. If you take that as a beginning start, and that's what I get out of Henry Gates. He's working with folks and saying, my goodness, look who we're related to. Look how our story is tied. You say, I didn't know. They're moved to tears when they said, I didn't know I was connected with the white community. A black person said, I didn't know I was connected in the white community this way. And so if you start with that EUB enthusiasm, the Gemeinschaft, if you start with the Gemeinschaft, man, if that's real, that mixed company can be an amazing mixed company, because people said, well, I'm Muslim, I'm not EUB, or I don't go to church, I'm not Christian, I'm not EUB. Said, well, there's something here for folks like us.
Right. Right. And based on our desire to welcome.
That's right.
Our desire to understand, our desire to bring people in and to help them feel like they belong and that they are part of that same connection.
And see, I think, Eric, you said it before, deeper than desire, it's about being. Who are we?
Yeah.
I don't think we can desire some of this. I didn't want some of it.
You have to do it.
It's being.
Yeah.
Like, I thought, well, this who I am. My grandpa and my grandma were this way. That's who I am. Then my desires are influenced by my being.
One parting thought from each of you. If there was one thing you could share with students here now, what would you want to tell them? What would be your encouragement for our students right now? If you got to be the chaplain one more time, or you get to preach one more time, what would be the takeaway from that moment for you?
Well, I think Joshua's words at the end of his life in this Old Testament, the end of the Exodus, and moving on to the next chapter in the history of Israel, was saying, who are you going to serve? Choose this day. Make a decision about what you're going to do and what you're going to be, and what tradition are you going to be rooted in and grounded in? And how is that going to bear the most significant fruit in the future? There's lots of things you could serve that are not very meaningful and take a lot of time and energy, but there are things that are meaningful that make a difference in people's lives. And I think that's, we need to raise those questions during those 4 years, precious years that students are here.
I think my experience and my message is go someplace you haven't been before and sit with someone you're not inclined to sit with. It's so easy to go and be with somebody not like me, not like you. That's the challenge, and it's risky, and it doesn't always work, but I think we have to go into new territory and find out what's waiting for us and how we could be changed in that meeting.
2 weeks ago, I'm the president of the Naperville Interfaith Leaders Association. Mm-hmm. And we organized an event in response to some religious prejudice, including the horrific murder of a 6-year-old boy in Plainfield. Someone I do know well was murdered. And so as a response to that, we organized an event with 8 religious speakers and a congressman and a council member of Naperville. We had 300 people, and as president, I started out and I said, I grew up in a church where the logo was handshake. And I said, we're going to be shaking hands with different people today.
Hear, hear.
And I grew up in a church where different people from different traditions, where in their own countries were at war with each other, and here in the United States, they shook hands and said, we are brothers and sisters.
Hear, hear.
Thank you. Can we show our appreciation for Lynn and Tom today? Thank you so much for coming out. Thank you for watching this video. If you're online and you have a moment and you've made it this far, go ahead and like the video. And if you would, please leave your comments and questions. We want these to be ongoing dialogues. Take a moment to look at some of our other videos here, and we're so glad that you were with us. Take care.